We have now seen what the search states in our new search space look like. They are partial plans, and each partial plan consists of the four components just described. Next, we will look at the state transitions in our new search space. These state transitions can be understood as plan refinement operations, as they take a partial plan and refine it into a different partial plan. And since there are four components to a partial plan, there are also four principal plan refinement operations that we will look at next. The first component of a partial plan were the actions, or to be more precise, partially instantiated operators. In general, the partial plans we'll be considering contain the following actions. The first thing they contain is a representation of the initial state, and then they will also hold a representation of the goal conditions. Having initial state and goal conditions as part of the actions in our partial plan simplifies the representation. Normally, most of the actions in our plan will be partially instantiated operators from our domain. One thing that is important here is that when an operator is added to our plan as a partially instantiated action, it gets a new set of variables that is different from all the variables we've previously used. So the actions in our plan don't share variables. Adding an action to a plan is a plan refinement operation. But I've already talked about the least commitment principle in planning, and that means we only want to introduce new actions into our plan for a good reason. And the two reasons we have for adding new actions to a plan can be that we have an unsatisfied precondition in our plan that we still need to achieve, so there's another action that has a precondition that is not supported anywhere. Then we may add an action that has that precondition as an effect. Or the second case is that we have an unsatisfied goal condition that we still need to satisfy, and we may use an effect of a newly added action to satisfy that goal condition. One important distinction to the type of planning we've done previously is that we can add an action anywhere in the plan. In forward search, we've always added an action to the end of the plan we're currently building up, and in backward search, we've added it to the beginning. Here we have no such restriction. We can add new actions anywhere in the plan. Here is a pictorial representation of what this could look like. We start with the empty plan. The empty plan consists of the initial state and the goal. The initial state contains all those things that are initially true, so all the propositions that are true in the initial state are added here as assertions. The goal contains all the goal conditions we want to be true. I've used different colors for the different propositions here to indicate what is already true and what still needs to be achieved. So all the propositions in the initial state are true and we don't need to achieve them anymore, whereas the propositions in the goal still need to be achieved in some way. So they are red. Now, adding an action simply takes a partially instantiated operator and adds it to this plan as shown here. When I add a partially instantiated operator to a plan, I add this number to give a unique reference to this action. So if I add another instance of the same operator, I can distinguish them by this reference. I also use this reference as an index to the variables of this operator, such that I can distinguish the different variables. Remember, I told you each new operator instance gets a new set of variables. And according to the least commitment principle, I keep these as variables and don't assign values to them immediately. And when I add a new operator, of course, it comes with its own set of preconditions and effects over its variables. The preconditions are in red here because I still need to achieve these conditions if I want to be able to execute this operator. The effects are given as green because if I execute this action, then these things will necessarily become true. There's no other activity I need to do to make these conditions true. And of course, I can add any number of actions to this plan. As shown here, I've added a second action. This has the index, the reference 2, with a new set of variables, its own preconditions and effects. The next component of a partial plan we'll be looking at are the causal links. If we only add actions to a plan when we have a good reason for doing so, then perhaps it's a good idea to record that reason, the rationale for adding this action, in a causal link. So adding causal links is our next plan refinement operation. And a causal link always goes from a provider to a consumer. In the partial plans we've looked at so far, there are two possible providers, namely an effect of an action that we've just added to the plan, or an atom that holds in the initial state. Both these can be used as a provider for a causal link. The consumer of a causal link can also be one of two things. The first is a precondition of an action that we've added to the plan, or a goal condition that we need to satisfy to achieve our overall goal. Note that implicit in this, we also have an ordering constraint. The provider must of course come before the consumer. But we will deal with ordering constraints separately and later. Also, while the provider must come before the consumer, it doesn't necessarily have to come directly before the consumer, so there may be other actions in between those two. The main reason for adding causal links to a plan is to prevent interference between the different actions in a plan. So, for example, if we add a new action to the plan after we have inserted a causal link, and the new action could come between the provider and the consumer, then we have to make sure that none of the effects of that action interfere with the condition that is protected in the causal link. Also, causal links help us to keep track of preconditions that we have already achieved. If we have an incoming link to a precondition, that means this precondition is somehow achieved in the plan and we no longer need to worry about it. Going back to our example, here is what adding causal links look like. A causal link is denoted by this type of dotted arrow in this diagram. And when we added the move action, we did this to achieve a goal, so we also can add a causal link that represents that. We used the move action to use the effect at R1M1 to support the goal at robot location 2. Clearly, these variables can be instantiated such that the goal is satisfied. Note that with the addition of this causal link, I've changed the color of this goal to green, because this goal is now supported by a causal link, which means it is achieved by an action that is in our current partial plan. Similarly, when I added the second action, this has an effect not unloaded that can be used to support the other goal, and I can simply add a causal link to support this goal. Again, the color changes to green because it is now supported. This looks like the addition of actions and causal links should always go hand in hand. But there is a good reason for considering the addition of causal links as an independent plan refinement operation. And here is an example of a causal link that was not introduced together with an action. We use a condition from the initial state to support a precondition of an action that we've just introduced. Of course, we could also have causal links going directly from the initial state to the goal. But in this example, only one of the goal conditions was true in the initial state.